Season 1 of SpongeBob is arguably one of the most nostalgia-inducing pieces of media for anyone born in the 90s. It might not be the best season of the show in terms of plots, character development, and humor, but there's just something about it that hits a little bit differently. While some of that is probably due to the nostalgia factor, there are a few things unique about the first season of SpongeBob that I really love and just wanted to talk about with you guys. Some of these things have been mentioned plenty of times by others, but there are some that I haven't actually seen anyone mention before, so if that intrigues you, be sure to stick around for the whole video. Okay, so this one is pretty obvious, and it's one of the things that has been talked about to death, so I'll leave this section relatively short, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about it at all. As many of you probably already know, Season 1 of SpongeBob was all hand-drawn. I'm not just talking about the backgrounds either. The animation itself was done by hand. The way it works is special ink would be used by artists to hand draw each frame individually onto a transparent slide. Those slides were then physically placed in front of the backgrounds and recorded. You can typically tell what part of the frame is the background painting and which part is the animation cell because the color palette will usually be slightly off due to the differences in the medium used. One place to look for this difference is in doors, as they must be animated if they are opened or closed during a scene. If we take a look at Help Wanted, for example, we can see this when SpongeBob leaves his house. If you look closely, the color of the door is actually slightly brighter than that of the frame and the window. This is because the door was painted using ink on an animation cell, while the rest of the house was painted with traditional paints on paper. Every SpongeBob fan knows that the clouds on the show are flowers. Typically, these flowers have 5 petals protruding in a ring-like fashion around a central circle. This has been the design the show has used since the very first season. However, in the first season, we saw a lot more variation among these clouds. The most common variation is the 4-petal version, which is similar to the 5-petal, but instead of the petals being arranged in a pentagon-like pattern, they are arranged like a plus sign, or like in the cardinal directions. We see this variant throughout the first season and even into later seasons, although it is certainly less common than the 5-petal design, and far less common in general after Season 1. However, this is not the only variant of the iconic cloud we see in the first season. In the episode Jellyfishing, we see the ultra-rare 6-petal design in this scene at the beginning of the episode where SpongeBob and Patrick are trying to convince Squidward to go jellyfishing with them. There's another 6-petal cloud about a minute later when Squidward is riding his bike to work, too. Also, this is a side note, but I really like this scene where Squidward is riding his bike because you can see how the background paintings are pasted together. There are these really obvious spots where there are no flowers, which is where the panels are joined together. If you look really closely, you can even see the exact lines demarcating one painting from the next. That's just a really cool novelty you only get in the first season. Anyways, there are several other 6-petal flowers throughout the season, including one in Bubble Stand right behind Patrick's house when he wakes up. And there's another one right next to Squidward's house after SpongeBob blows the elephant bubble. And there's a giant one after Squidward goes back into his house after blowing his own bubble. There's also one in the opening shot of Ripped Pants. But as far as I can tell, there are no 6-petal clouds after Season 1. I have always wondered if these were intentional or if they were intended to have 5 petals and had to be changed because the artist messed up. After all, they were painted by hand. However, looking back on it, they are a bit more common than I realized, so I'm sure they were mostly, if not entirely, intentional. If they were accidents, though, I'm glad they happened because it gave me something to talk about in this video.
We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
The only other Cloudflower variant I can think of comes in the episode Graveyard Shift, when they are all squiggly and green during the night, most visible in the scene where SpongeBob takes out the trash. I thought the same design was used in Scaredy Pants, but upon rewatching that episode, turns out I was wrong, so I guess that was just a one-off. And that's a Season 2 episode, so that variant doesn't really count for the purposes of this video, but I thought it was worth a mention anyways. That being said, there is still one more unique thing about the clouds in Season 1, and that is the quantity of them. They seem to be far more common in this season than they are starting in Season 2, especially in the first few episodes of the show. It seems maybe that they realized they could get the same effect with fewer clouds, or maybe they were just tired of painting that many. Whatever the reason for this change was, I think it was a good choice, as some of the backgrounds can be almost a little bit distracting with how many clouds there are. Before I move on to the next topic, I have one last note on Season 1 clouds that I would like to share. When you think of SpongeBob clouds, you probably think of the classic 5-petal design I've mentioned before. The design you are thinking of is probably mostly symmetrical too, right? Starting in Season 2, the clouds are not exactly symmetrical all the time, but usually they're pretty close, and the design remains pretty consistent throughout the rest of the show. In Season 1 though, a lot of these 5-petal cloud flowers have more unique shapes. Furthermore, there tends to be a lot more variation in the size of the flowers in Season 1, although maybe that variation is just more noticeable because of the sheer quantity of them. Recently, Aw made a video about how modern SpongeBob has lost the underwater atmosphere that was present in the early seasons of the show. He made a lot of good arguments in that video, pointing out how it isn't obvious that the show takes place underwater at all in the newest episodes. But I would take this a step further by saying that the show already started to lose that underwater feel as soon as the second season. There's just so much more subtle sound design in Season 1 that contributes to the underwater vibe that starts to become less common even as early as the second season. There are more bubble animations in Season 1 and their associated sounds, and more ambient noise during pauses between dialogue. Some of these effects are extremely subtle, so you really have to be listening carefully for them, which I suspect is why they started using them less and less until they basically stopped putting them in entirely. This isn't to say that these effects are not present in Season 2 and beyond, they absolutely are. It just seems to me that they are used a bit more frequently in Season 1. For example, in the Season 2 episode, The Secret Box, we see Patrick step outside his rock in dramatic fashion, stirring up a lot of bubbles. While those bubbles are present, they don't make any noise. Granted, the noises are there for the rest of the episode, but little omissions like this seem to be more common outside of the first season. Also, I think the general art style of Season 1 lends itself to the fact that the show is underwater. I don't necessarily think that this was intentional, because I'm really just referring to the fact that it isn't as crisp and clean as the art and animation in the newer seasons, even Season 2 and beyond. It looks like a show that was made in the 90s, because it was. Everything is just a little bit hazy and washed out compared to later seasons of the show. That may very well have simply been a limitation of the technology at the time, rather than a conscious design choice, but either way, personally, I think it adds to the underwater aesthetic of Season 1. With any animated show that has been on the air as long as SpongeBob has, there are bound to be subtle changes in the voices of the characters over the years. In my opinion, this is most noticeable with Season 1 compared to every other season of the show. Squidward and Mr. Krabs' voices are both noticeably different than in the rest of the show. Squidward's voice is a little bit lower in pitch, and Eugene's is a bit more gravelly and inconsistent. We can also hear differences in SpongeBob's voice, which I think is most noticeable with his laugh, which is seemingly always changing. Just take the scene from the episode Plankton, for example. Here, SpongeBob's laugh is way more nasally than it normally is, almost sounding like Tom Kenny was sick or was doing his Squidward impersonation when he recorded this line. That being said, I think the character whose voice is the most different in Season 1 is Patrick. I don't know how exactly to describe the changes in his voice from the first to second season. It honestly almost sounds like they just started using different recording hardware, like a new mic or something. His voice generally seems clearer, more defined, and perhaps a little bit lower with more support. Like he's talking a bit more from his chest than his mouth, if that makes sense to you guys. By comparison, his voice in Season 1 is a bit breathier and a tad more inconsistent in general, which makes sense as all the voice actors were still tweaking around with their characters' voices at that point in production. I think these differences are particularly noticeable whenever the characters are laughing. For example, here is Patrick laughing in boating school, and here he is laughing in The Secret Box. Am I the only one that hears a difference? Let me know in the comments. This is probably the most random thing about Season 1 that is in this video, but the Krusty Krab drive-thru is one of those strange and random inconsistencies SpongeBob is known for. Sometimes it's there, and sometimes it isn't. It seems that they decided to be a little bit more consistent with this after Season 1, as more often than not it is present in the first season, but after that it is much more rare. This is something that has always kind of bothered me about the show, but I generally prefer it when the drive-thru is there. I think it's funny that it's in the background, but no one ever uses it. Not to mention the fact that it's right in front of the door to Mr. Krabs' office, instead of being in the kitchen, which would make much more sense. Not to mention the fact that there's no drive-thru lane. So yeah, those are a few of the reasons why I love SpongeBob SquarePants Season 1. Do you love this season? Where would you rank it among all the seasons of the show? If you liked this video, please do give it a like, that would really help me out. If you really liked it, you might like the video where I talk about how SpongeBob is Plankton's best friend, where I talk about the Season 1 episode Fun. I'll put that one on screen for you to watch next. With that being said, that is all for this one. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care, and as always, never forget to be yourself.